Hello, my name is Jessica, and I am the Community Research Analyst here with Arts Etobicoke working on the Exploring Deep Data project. This video is the first part of a two-part series where we learn how to clean and visualize data using Google Sheets and Looker Studio. If you would like to follow along with this tutorial, you can find the sample dataset included on our website as part of the Digging into Data Asynchronous Learning module. So for this tutorial, I am assuming that you have worked with either Google Sheets or Excel before and have also used a few formulas to support your work. We'll only have time to go right into the basics today, but we do have a resource bank with other resources to support your learning that I encourage you to check out as well. So in terms of data cleaning, what does that really mean? What are we talking about when I say data cleaning? And I think probably the easiest thing to do to explain this is to show you an example of what happens when you don't clean your data and you just take the raw data that's completely untouched and try to go ahead and visualize it in Looker Studio or any platform for that matter. So here I've visualized the sample data set that we'll be working with today. This sample data set is from a arts organization that's based in West Toronto and includes the registration information for 5 workshops that were offered throughout 2024. Right away, we can see some issues here, but overall, we can see that we've got 82 folks in our sample, 82 people who've registered for these workshops. We can see the breakdown of the workshops down here. This looks okay. There are no visible problems, at least. Similarly, our chart breaking down registrants by age group also looks pretty good. We do have some null data here. Registrants by city is not doing what the title suggests it should be doing. We can't get any information easily from looking at this chart. It's just listing the addresses, which isn't very helpful to us. And then most evidently, the registrations location, which I can tell you is supposed to be a map, is giving us a big error message. So clearly there are some issues here that we have to go in and fix. And so this is really what cleaning data is about. It's about going into your data set, finding typos, finding any duplicate information, finding any missing information, and ensuring that your data set is accurate and that it's complete and valid and consistent. And really, data cleaning is the process of improving the quality of your data so that when you share it with others, you do know exactly what you are representing. And here is that same data set, but now we have gone in and cleaned it. This is very similar to what we'll be creating in the subsequent video. And we can see some changes. So in our previous visualization, we had 82 registrants. Now we just have 79. So clearly there has been a change there. Our map is working, so we can now see where folks are coming from in the city to register for our workshops. Registrants by city is very easy to understand. You don't have to be familiar with the data set to look at this chart and think, okay, well, the majority of people are coming from Toronto. We've also got a significant population coming from Etobicoke as well. Some people we don't know where they're coming from. Registrants by age, once again, is much more clear. We've lost that null age there. And then registrants by workshop hasn't changed, but it also means that we have gone in, we've looked at this data, and we're confident to say, yes, 25% of people who registered for workshops this year registered for our workshop on R&B. So now let's go ahead and take a look at our data set. So this is the sample data set that we'll be working with today. It's entirely fake, and I did create it from scratch, so it might be a little smaller than some of the data sets that you will be working with, but we'll be working with it as if it was a larger data set. The first thing I want to do is direct your attention to the structure of this data set. So you can see we've got a couple different columns here. In the first row, we have each of the column labels. So in column A, we have the ID number. So this data was potentially downloaded from kind of an event management system or something, and where they have assigned an ID number to each registrant. Account created, again, affiliated with that system we got this data from. Date of the workshop. We've got the original questions that folks were asked when they were registering. So please select the workshop you're registering for. Please enter your email, age range, and address. And when you are beginning to clean, analyze, visualize your data, you want to make sure that your data is in this format so that each column has a consistent data type. For example, date is just dates. and email is just email. And this will make your analysis and visualization process much easier and is really the first step. And before I make any changes to this data set here, I'm going to go in and create a copy. So I'm just going to come down to the worksheet label here, right click, select duplicate. And this means that if I accidentally delete the entire data set, if I write over some data, if I make any mistake, I can easily come back to that original data and take a look. The next thing I'm going to do is check for duplicates in my sample data set. And there are a couple different ways to do this. The first way we're going to use is conditional formatting. And because we have this ID number that I mentioned is developed by the system, and which is assigned to each registrant when they register for a workshop, I'm going to start by checking in this column here to see if that ID number crops up twice and why that could be. So I'm going to select the column here. Then I'm going to go up to Format and Conditional Formatting. And if I were working in Excel, I wouldn't have to use a formula for this, but we do have to input a custom formula to detect duplicates in Google Sheets. So I'm select custom formula is, and then in this space here, I'm going to enter the formula. And I'm going to use a count if formula. So essentially, I'm asking Google Sheets to count a cell if it occurs more than once. And that's going to look like this. Equals count if. In the brackets, I'm going to identify the range where Google Sheets should look to find these duplicates. And I want it to search the entire column A, so it's going to be A:A. I'm going to tell it where to start from. So I'm going to ask it to start from A1 here. And then I need to identify that it should count any cell that occurs more than once. So it's just going to be a simple greater than 1. And then I'm going to select done here. And that's added in that rule. And we can see right away that we do have some cells highlighted. So we have ID number 7408 is occurring twice. And if we take a look at this row, it does look like one of these rows is a perfect duplicate of the other. And so, for example, this could have been someone registering and hitting that submit button twice, sending their data through twice. We don't really want to include that in our sample data set. We've got a similar situation happening down here, row 2526 with ID number 4314. Once again, we can take a look, really go through and see that the data is identical for both rows. So we have at least 2 duplicates. When we come down here, we can see we've got the same ID number highlighted twice, ID number 195. However, and I'm just using tab to navigate between columns here, we can see that this first registration is for the improvised dance workshop. And then the second registration is for the R&B workshop. So this is actually the same person registering for 2 different workshops and isn't a duplication. So now I'm going to go in and delete those 2 duplicates that I found. And because of the size of the data set, what I could just do is go in and delete those 2 rows. But if it was a larger data set, that would take me likely much longer to scroll through and find those duplicates. So what I'm going to do is instead select the entire data set. So I'm going to use Control A or Command A if you're on a Mac. I'm going to go up to Data up here, Data Cleanup, and then Remove Duplicates. It's going to prompt me to certify that the data does have a header row, which it does. And then I'm going to select Remove Duplicates. And we can see here that we found 2 duplicates, just as we did earlier. So we'll select OK. The next thing I'm going to do is fix this address column. So if you remember when we were looking at that first dashboard, we had an error issue with our map. We also had something funky going on with our chart that described which city people were coming from. And that is because we're going back to that issue of we want each column to have a consistent data type. And right now we have 4 different types of data in one column. So we've got the address, we've got the city, we've got the postal code, and the province. And what we need is to have each of those in their own unique columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the split function to split this one column into 4. And before we go ahead, I want to draw your attention to the fact that each different data type, so for example, the address versus the city, is separated by a comma here. This is going to be very helpful for us because we can use the comma to actually split the cell. And that will look like this. So type equals split, open bracket. I'm going to select the cell that I want to split, comma, and then between two quotation marks, I'm going to insert that comma, and that's going to tell Google Sheets everything between these commas you need to put in one column, everything between the next two commas you're going to put in the other. And right away we can see that we've got 4 new columns. It split that very clearly. And I'm just going to take this, select select cell H2, hover over, and just drag it down right through. And this is going to drag down that formula and split it perfectly. So now if I go in here, you can see that when I have any cell selected in column H, up here, I don't have the address. I actually still have the formula, which isn't very helpful to me. So what I'm going to do is copy and paste the values back into this cell. So I'm going to select these 4 cells here, and I want to take these entire 4 columns and shift them over, only paste the values. So I'm going to do that by going Control Shift down arrow to select the data that I want to copy and paste. I'm going to Control C to copy. I'm going to select column G here, and then what I could do is right click, paste special, values only. But instead, I'm going to use the shortcut, which is Control Shift V. And you can see that I've really gone through, and now we just have the address in this column instead of the formula. So while I'm here, I'm going to go in and rename these columns. Whoops. And I'm also going to rename all of the columns that still have that original question in, so I can really clearly see what the data I'm working with here is. So now I've done that, I can really identify that there is some data here that I don't need. It's relevant to my analysis. If I'm interested in, say, where folks are coming from, how old they are, and what workshop they're registering for, I don't need, for example, this irrelevant account created situation. I also don't need their email. It's irrelevant to my analysis. It also identifies the registrant. So I want to remove that identifying information from my data set. And for a similar reason, I'm going to remove the address. I'm going to select all the columns I need to delete by holding down Control, right-click, delete selected columns. Now my data set is looking a lot more manageable. I'm going to automatically change the column length so I can see all of my data. I'm going to select my entire sheet by clicking up here, and then just double-clicking on any of the borders between 2 columns here. And right away, that's gone ahead and updated everything. I'm also, just so it's easy for me and anyone else who's coming into this sheet to see, going to bold our column headers here. And when I scroll, you'll notice that I lose these column headers. So I want to keep them. For example, if I was in a much bigger sheet, if I had many more columns or a significantly greater number of rows, it would be very helpful for me to know where I am, even if I can't see if I'm not right at the top of my data set. So I'm going to freeze these 2 columns by going up to View, or freeze the first row, sorry, by going up to View here, freeze 1 row. Next, I'm going to take a look at this age group column, which it has some weird alignments happening here. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is this 12 to 19 age group, which when I select, you can see up here, it's actually recognizing as a date, which is not what we want at all. We want all of this data. You can see that none of the other groups are being recognized as dates, and we do want all of this data to be of a consistent type. So I'm going to select the entire column again by going Control Shift down arrow. Because we do have some gaps in our data set, we might have to hit the down arrow a couple of times. Then I'm going to go up here to the More Formats icon and then just select plain text. Because the age group here isn't actually a number, we're not going to be dividing ages 12 to 19. It really is a string of text that we want Google Sheets to look at. And when we're looking at this string of text, we want to make sure that each string is the same length. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to left align this column, just so it's easier to look at. And you can see that that had a big impact, but it hasn't fully left aligned everything. So for example, row 5 here, we have 30 to 39 is still kind of floating around. And this is going back to that consistent string length. What has happened here is that there are actually some spaces before our age group that we'd like to get rid of. Obviously, we could go in and delete those. But then we would miss, if we were going through manually, maybe something like what's happening in this cell, where we actually have some spaces after our data as well. And evidently, you can really pull out where those spaces before are happening, but you can't see where those spaces are occurring after your data. And this, because it extends that string, the number of essentially characters in the cell, any analysis you'll do will think that this 30 to 39 is actually completely different from the 30 to 39 over here, which will be very confusing and will mess up your analysis. So what we want to do is trim any excess spaces. So I'm going to add a column directly to the right, and I'm going to type the trim formula, which is trim, and then just select the data directly to the left. Google Sheets has correctly given me that autofill option, and you can see right away that we've now fixed all of those trim issues. We've gotten rid of those extra spaces. And then once again, I'm just going to select the entire data set or the entire column, and copy paste just the values because I don't want to be copying over that formula, and then delete that column. The next thing I'm going to take a look at is the city column here. And we can see we've got some different capitalizations. We've got Toronto and North York all in uppercase. We've got Brampton all in lowercase, similar with Etobicoke here. And I want to fix that, partially just so it's easier to read, again, also so that all of my North Yorks can be grouped together. I'm going to use that, and I'm going to set everything to proper capitalization. This is really your choice. You could do all lowercase, all uppercase. I'm going to go with proper here. So I'm going to type proper, and then very similar to trim, it's just select the cell that you would like to shift the capitalization of. We're going to select all our data again, Control C, and then Control Shift V to get rid of that formula. The last thing I'm going to do here before we're ready to visualize is insert some filters. So I'm going to select my entire data set again by going Control A. I'm going to come up to the panel and select this Create a Filter icon. And what that's done is put a filter in my first row here. And this makes it really easy to kind of explore and understand my data set better. For example, I'm going to filter my city, and I can scroll through and see all of the different options here. And when I'm doing that, I can see that I've got a couple typos in my data set. So I've got a typo for Etobicoke. I've got a typo for Toronto down here. I've also got a rogue postal code here. So I'm going to deselect everything and just select the items that I would like to change here. And now I've filtered my data set. I'm going to go in and just fix those typos. Copy over this. Perfect. So let's fix the typos there. And what I could also do for the city column, because I know that I want to create a chart where I'm able to list my cities, I'm going to go through and I'm just going to select the blanks. And blanks or null values can be an additional challenge when you are visualizing your data. So in this case, for the city, I'm going to actually insert an unknown. And so this will show up in my chart as unknown, but it will still ensure that I'm not removing these registrants from my data set when I represent them. And that will become more clear in the next video. So I'm going to select those as all as unknown. And now we are pretty good to go. I do notice an error here where someone has left off their province off, so I'm just going to fix that quickly. But yes, that was a very short introduction to data cleaning. There is so much more that you can do. There's a lot you can do within the sheet as well to code your data to make it even more, to make it easier to analyze. If we did have more time today, the one next step that I would take is making sure that everyone has identified their own city accurately. So sometimes people refer, if you ask them what city they're in, they can say Etobicoke, they can say Toronto, both can be correct. But I would want to decide on a system that I would use. I would go back to their postal code and work through it, just to make sure that all the cities are identified correctly here. But as I said, we don't have time for that today. I do encourage you to check out any of the further resources that we have shared or included in our resources bank. And I hope to see you for the subsequent data visualization video. Thank you.